Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Noyes. I head the Americas for the Alternative Investment Management Association, or AIMA. And within that, I also have the great fun of chairing our AIMA DOG group, or Digital Asset Working Group, because y'all know we love our acronyms. Dogs, yeah, it is an endless series of puns. I have way too much fun with it. But we are here today talking about really what's bringing TradFi and institutional adoption of tokenization. I hear my voice getting louder, so I'm hoping that means you all can hear us. Yes, I'm getting thumbs up. Awesome. This time it's different are the most dangerous words in finance, but there has been real progress when it comes to interest in and adoption of tokenization. And I was particularly impressed. There was an article in Bloomberg just last week that listed out the actual use cases and live examples of what's currently in force. We're moving from the memes of the institutions are coming to having the institutions here, literally on stage and on the couch with me. So over the next 35 minutes, we'll delve into what's actually happening and what to expect from financial institutions in the realm of tokenization going forward. So Cynthia, Roger, Talia, each of you work for some of the largest traditional financial institutions. Can you each share how you and your firms are approaching tokenization? So Cynthia, I'll start with you.
Great. Good morning, everybody. So Fidelity has been involved in the digital asset space for over a decade now. We started early in looking at Bitcoin before a lot of the other parts of TradFi was interested in looking at blockchains. From the tokenization standpoint, that's been part of the evolution of how we have continued to evaluate ways that this technology is going to be impactful on the ways that we operate as a financial services institution. And this covers everything that we do from the asset management side in developing investment products and services all the way through to how it is that we interact with clients on our brokerage side of the business. And so what we are really excited about, and my team in particular from a tokenization standpoint, is the opportunity to be able to bring traditional investment capabilities to on-chain investors, but also to think about new ways in which traditional investments can be used in different ways when they are available on-chain and able to be transacted and transferred 24/7.
Awesome. I look forward to digging into that. Roger?
Yeah, I think everybody's journey into digital assets is a little different. Ours at Franklin Templeton just started with what can we use a distributed ledger to do, by and large. I mean, I was wise enough to know that, of all my years of experience in asset management and capital markets, that we're full of ledgers. And so just paying attention to distributed ledger technology was where we started our journey. And what we found is in kind of records management inside of the transfer agency process, that's where we had the bulk of our record keeping responsibilities, transaction records for shareholders of mutual funds. And so trying to find an application for distributed ledger technology there was just, quite frankly, was just like a pure R&D experience for us. Fortunately, we had the foresight to say, hey, let's try this tokenization around a pretty simple, plain vanilla government money fund. And we did that because we knew that money funds were part of the transactional economy. The Federal Reserve keeps track of M2 includes money funds, right? And there's literally trillions and trillions of dollars all over planet Earth in money fund constructs. And so it was like trying to find what could we actually put onto public blockchain rails. Are there new and better outcomes and utilities as a result of doing that? And absolutely, when we talk about Benji, our U.S. government online money fund, it is a on-chain money fund. It is all about that new utilities that get unlocked by operating in this composable, very dynamic environment versus the pre-existing rails.
No, that's fascinating. I think it also probably has the best product name amongst most TradFi. Benji, it's so cute. The memes I would say the memes write themselves, but the intern writes the memes, right? Who are the clients for that product? What's the take-up you're seeing?
Well, we're actually seeing, Benji is delivered inside a digital wallet. And so, like, who are the native organizations, entities who are comfortable holding their investments inside of a digital wallet? That is still a growing and expanding array, but there's a number of A-list digital asset, crypto native organizations that are super comfortable with that construct already. The idea that they're going to hold their assets in a digital wallet. The increased utility that being on the blockchain provides means that those institutions can do all sorts of really super interesting things, like instantly transfer Benji from one of their corporate accounts to another corporate account pretty seamlessly without having to go back through the banking system to do that. And so creating more efficiency, that's kind of the increased utility. There's a lot of other unlocks, but there's a number of different investors who are beginning to understand what they can now do with an interest-bearing money fund as part of their financial management, and we're enjoying having those conversations and building those client relationships.
Fantastic. And Talia, what about you and BNY?
Yeah, so I'll take a little bit of a different approach, I think. So when we think about tokenization at Bank of New York, a lot of the conversation that we talk about is what's similar in the traditional world and what's different in the digital world, and how do we act as that bridge for folks to operate between the two. So we have a lot of clients who come to us and say, I really want to be involved in this new digital world, but I need help. And I need help to enable my operations in order to get there. We were just talking about this before we came out. And in order to do that, we like to take the approach of saying what's new and what's different, and what are we actually trying to solve the need for, if that makes sense. So if you think about tokenization as a concept of trying to gain access or distribution to certain products, I like to think about it, I'm a little bit of a history nerd, the first depository receipt. Does anyone know what a depository receipt is? Mm-hmm. Okay, a few people. But the first depository receipt was issued in, I believe, 1927, so almost 100 years ago. And in many ways, that was like the first tokenized product, right? It was enabling access to investors, solving a need that wanted to get access to UK equity, basically, from the United States. And it's still not really straightforward in order to do that without the advent of this innovation called the depository receipt about 100 years ago. So as we think about what we're trying to do in tokenization now, BNY has been in continuous operation for 240 years. The oldest bank in the United States, founded by one of Benji's friends, Alexander Hamilton. I'll save the Hamilton puns for everybody. But really thinking about that legacy of firsts and having the privilege and opportunity to do so and meet our clients where they're at and develop those new products and services that act as this bridge between the traditional world and the digital world, and doing so in a way that's a seamless client experience. So Roger talks about, transfer agency. I didn't have transfer agency on my 2024 digital assets bingo card, but it's probably one of the most talked about topics this year, right? Because we're talking a lot about tokenized funds. How do you issue a tokenized fund? You need a transfer agent who can do things like that. So thinking about what are those new pieces and what are the old pieces, and how do we bring together that operation.
And as all of you working for storied institutions, as you talk to them, both internal and external stakeholders, about tokenization and tokenized real assets, do they get first of all, do they see a distinction between that and more speculative crypto? Does it matter? Is that conversation now over? Roger, what are those conversations like?
Yeah, those conversations are kind of, at least at Franklin Templeton, in the rearview mirror. I think we've had the fortunate situation that Jenny Johnson, who's the CEO of Franklin Templeton, actually spent lots of years running ops, Chief Operating Officer for Franklin. So she, as we started doing our R&D project on Benji and looking at the cost comparison of using these public blockchain database ledger systems versus our essentially monolithic database systems, and the efficiencies began to just stand out in a huge way. It's like, okay, yeah, this is going to improve the efficiency of our own system, of our own
Can we put some
business.
numbers on those efficiencies and cost savings, like ballpark?
Generally speaking, when we started working with the SEC about we would like to use public blockchain ledgers for this transfer agency activity, they said, okay, let's go down a path where You launch the product, the fund, you use the legacy system, you use the new system. We'll do a reconciliation some months down the road to talk about that. The reconciliation process shouldn't be surprising. The things that we had to reconcile was because there was far more accuracy in the new system. We were talking about a time period when the Fed funds rate was still at zero or just climbing off of zero. So when you annualize that yield and you're taking that back to a daily dividend, sometimes those rounding errors didn't show up in the legacy system and they were showing up in the new system. Those are kind of examples. But really, it was like looking at our own legacy costs of operating these transfer agency processes and what that cost, and then the cost of the new system. And I mean, we're talking about 50,000 transactions that on a cost basis on our legacy system. Not all of us have the same cost structures, understood. But we're costing us about $1 per transaction to do that. Subscriptions, redemptions, reinvestment of dividends. In the new system, it cost us a grand total of $1.52 worth of stellar lumens to do it. So $50,000 versus $1.52. It was just astronomical. That spilled forward a lot of other things that started happening at Franklin Templeton as a result of digital assets. But that alone gave confidence for Jenny Johnson and kind of operators to say, this is a new ecosystem that builds upon the ecosystems that we have. How fast we get there, we were talking about in the green room a little bit about that. How fast does that really come about? But we definitely see it as an improvement. Our conversations with the regulators, they're beginning to adopt that. They understand that there's more for all stakeholders in the system to be able to use this more transparent system. And so I think we get there. It's a question of how fast it comes about.
Yeah, and thank you for that specificity. I think it just really drives home the quantum improvement that we're looking at. And Talia, how about you, in terms of, as we move beyond digital asset clients interacting with tokenization, but look to some traditional finance institutional clients interacting with tokenization, do they need convincing?
It's a good question. I think what I really love about what I get to do every day is that we sit at this intersection of traditional financial services and the new kind of evolving digital space. We've been in a privileged position over the last couple of years that we just have so many people who want to talk to us about what's going on in the digital space. And for the most part, I would say the vast majority of folks are excited and curious. I think curiosity is something that is really required in order to, curiosity and resilience probably are the two words I would use for what's required as traditional institutions get into the space. I definitely think there are some skeptics. I think we were discussing that before. But I think the curiosity is more of a driver than the skepticism now. At least I've seen a shift of that over the last couple of years. I think when you look at the evolution of the Bitcoin ETFs and the Ethereum ETFs over the last 10 months, that I think was a kind of sea change in saying like this has arrived. And whether or not you fundamentally, philosophically, religiously agree with kind of this future, it's here and it's something that you can't ignore. And so how does this evolve our business models, to use Roger's language, or other types of kind of operating models as we move into this new world? I think people can't really have their head in the sand about it anymore. But I think we try to take a very kind of measured approach to say, we'll meet you where you're at, like come as you are kind of thing, which I think is really important for people in this space. I think it's been historically more, what's the right word, like exclusionary in terms of the language, et cetera. And I think the more that everyone in this room and beyond can open the tent to demonstrate that excitement and meet people's curiosity where they're at, I think the better it is for the overall ecosystem.
Yeah, we're bringing the excitement back, money market funds to tokenization. And can you talk to why that's such a compelling use case?
So before I go there, just maybe a couple of observations on what Talia just talked about. From the standpoint of how we've decided what areas and what asset classes we're interested in, a little bit of what I think is different now than maybe 3 or 5 years ago is there is much more engagement with the technology, and so more institutional players and infrastructure providers are getting into this space, and more traditional investors are curious about it. But what I think really is going to drive adoption is real use cases and real purpose. So rather than answering or asking the question of what can I do with the technology, I think adoption is going to come from what are the issues that our investors are facing? What are the issues that are either pain points or very, very expensive, right, operating environments or manual operating environments, and what can we do to solve for those pain points? And this is where I think the idea of tokenizing a money market fund is compelling for more than a couple of reasons. Roger talked about quite a few of them already, which is that there are existing on-chain investors who want access to a stable instrument that pays yield. And when they look at what their alternatives are in the crypto native space, there really isn't. And so the idea of tokenizing a treasury and tokenizing a money market fund is very compelling for their use cases. It's also compelling from a traditional investment standpoint that today, using money market funds as collateral for your derivative exposures is already being done. But that collateral is limited in how it is able to be moved, which then creates more expense in how it is that you're able to manage the margin of your positions. And so the idea of being able to move your money market fund as collateral to more efficiently manage your balance sheets is compelling, and it's compelling for material economic reasons that institutional investors are interested in. And so how do we bring the infrastructure to be able to support that? So rather than looking for ways to apply the infrastructure, it's what are the issues that we're looking to solve for, and then how do we apply that to solve for those issues?
No, that's a fantastic framing. And I mean, from the alternative investment world, the biggest use case that folks are excited about is distribution. Fundraising. Shocking, right? But there's a big theme, particularly within private markets, so private equity and less liquid funds, to see how they can access a wider, retail base, essentially, of investors, because it's an institutional investor base. Historically, institutions as a whole are nearly fully allocated, so if they look to future growth, that's the market, because right now there's something like 1% of global AUM in alt, so even if they get that to 2, that's a massive amount of market opportunity. And there are some, traditional wrappers of funds that work, but they can be clunky, they can be expensive, so there's a real look to see if, is tokenization an answer to this challenge? Can this create for an easier subscription redemption process, the easier trading of secondary interests in some of these funds? It doesn't wave a magic wand over existing regulatory requirements, right? If funds are limited to accredited investors and certain qualified purchasers, that kind of the wrapper of that becomes agnostic. But I think that's where you're seeing the greatest amount of, early focus. And even things like, investing in a closed-end fund, usually there's capital calls. That can be slow, that can be, onerous, one of these things with many, many different touch points. There can be cybersecurity concerns, right? Because each capital call is an opportunity for a bad actor to insert themselves within the process. So there's been some really interesting kind of potential applications for this. Not quite live at this point, but the Project Guardian white paper, I think, did a really great job about a year ago of laying out what this could look like. And again, the advantages, especially in a wealth management framework, being able to reallocate across a number of different clients.
I think following up on that, for sure around planet Earth, there's different regulatory environments that have a different pace of encouraging the adoption of the kind of the digital wallet infrastructure. I think, our friends here at Fidelity and Bank of New York here, with their custody services that they've created, they're kind of on the forefront of how do we bring those custody services to our deep bench of clients already here. So I think some of that's still on the come. But what made me more excited about tokenization many years ago now is what all the great people in this room are actually doing. And that is, how do we expand the opportunity sets of investments for clients. You're talking about a delivery mechanism through an account and trying to create more efficiencies in that. I think that's great, but what excites me is are there more things on planet Earth that can be brought into ownership through this type of technology so that institutional investors don't always just have to go out the risk spectrum to get more return, but somehow we actually help either shift up the efficient frontier or begin to recognize that the world is not a two-dimensional world. It's a three-dimensional, four-dimensional world, and there's now no longer just an efficient frontier, but there's a plane that we're now going to optimize along, whether that third dimension is outcomes or something that's more personal, identifiable either to an institution or an individual that they're now optimizing against. I think these are all the real possibilities that exist that makes it, quite frankly, a super exciting time to be in asset management with these technologies coming forward.
Yeah, no, and I certainly don't disagree that that's really the exciting unlock, right? And I think it's not dissimilar to when you're talking about AI. Sometimes it's just surfacing these use cases, right? We're limited by our human imaginations and seeing pattern recognition of what came before. So then you get the little bit of tinkering rather than the huge leap forward of innovation, just because there is something that did not exist in this analog world that might come forward. So I think as more work is done, and often by the folks on the front lines, the digital asset native firms in particular, that really gets exciting because then it's not just an improvement, but it's a wholesale new market, right?
I think it's interesting. We often use the phrase at BNY, like, this is an evolution, not necessarily a revolution with certain tokenization products. And I think there's sometimes an underestimation for the complexity of the operations behind these funds. I come from more of a securities collateral background, and as I've moved more into the fund space over the last 18 months, as we like to say, we're putting the fun in funds with digital assets. But as we've moved into the space, like the operational complexity that exists in this space, it's doing the digital part and the technical part is sometimes the easy bit of it. It's what are the structures, what's the regulation, what are the operations that exists around that really needs to be thought through. When we think about distribution, like, what does that mean? Who are we trying to get it in the hands of? What venues or not are we using? So I think it's almost thinking about that full end-to-end asset lifecycle and seeing where along that lifecycle can we embed this technology in order to improve it versus trying to fully revolutionize the whole thing all at once. And I think in some ways it's a fool's errand because we're looking at structures that have been in place, to Roger's point, for like decades. And that's, if you approach it from we're just going to wholesale change this, I don't think anyone's going to have any success, just because of the fact that funds touch, and these guys probably know the stats way more than I do, right? But funds just touch so many people around the world. And when we think about, what ETFs are doing to mutual funds and what alts are now kind of evolving into, really important to think about where are the opportunities across the life cycle, in my view, versus that, we're just going to tear the whole thing up and move forward.
I think from an asset manager standpoint, and a lot of, Roger, what you talked about in terms of, how how an individual thinks about, personal wealth has been framed a lot by, the way in which our capital markets have evolved. But there are so many other things, around us that are part of our overall personal wealth. And to have an opportunity now to be able to think about, your financial wealth in more holistic terms, and now being able to think about assets that should be part of, right, how it is that you think about your overall wealth, and then being able to incorporate that into the way in which you manage your overall financial portfolios. There's a more personalization aspect to how it is that you're able to manage your financial lives, and that resonates with investors as well.
Yeah, just bringing that value in all of its forms onto the blockchain. Talia, do we need what else do we need from an infrastructure perspective to move forward?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the life cycle. Like I said, having kind of dove directly into the funds world over the last 18 months, and in some ways I find it's helpful not having that background necessarily to be able to look at it and be like, oh my God, wow, there's a lot here. But thinking across the asset life cycle from research from issuance, from custody, both digital and traditional, right? The traditional assets also need custody, accounting, striking NAVs. How many times have we heard, over the last couple of years, real-time NAVs? Like, what are the complexities of doing that? What are the dependencies across the market? So we look across the asset lifecycle and look at what do folks need from a support perspective. So earlier this year, we announced our support of BlackRock's Biddle Fund. We announced a couple weeks ago our support of Wisdom Tree's funds. Those are some things that are publicly out there, right? But I think look across the life cycle and say, what are all the things that need to be done? Look at what the technology can do to improve some pieces of that, and what's actually required from a fund board or regulatory perspective, and what can actually be improved. I think people underestimate the complexities of this, as with most things, which is why they come to folks like us, which is exciting.
And AIMA and PwC published a couple of weeks ago our 6th annual crypto hedge fund report, where 33% of the hedge fund respondents said they were exploring or actively committed to tokenization. But not surprisingly, regulatory challenges were the biggest hurdle to wider adoption. And I promise we will not get all lawyer on you. There is a legal panel later today. But Roger, you're having lots of those conversations with regulators globally. Do you think there's hope ahead for getting some unlocks?
Yeah, I actually feel like, and I've been on this journey with regulators, whether it's the SEC or whether it's the Lux regulators now for probably going on 6 years. I have never been more excited than we are right now about where the opportunities and the unlocks and the permissions that we've been seeking for Benji specifically, and then porting over to what we'll have in a global Benji or the other expressions of Benji as money market funds around the world are beginning to unfold in front of us. And I'll remind everybody that just because we can do something doesn't always mean that we should do it. There's real considerations. I mean, we have increased the velocity of everything, right? We're talking about that, Roger can transfer to Cynthia Benji or a tokenized version of Fidelity's money fund pretty instantaneously. That's super powerful, but like this whole industry has only grown up in the wake of the global financial crisis, right? And it feels like this networking behavior is probably laying pipes for for contagion to occur if and when it does occur. And again, we just have to look back to that weekend when Silicon Valley Bank went under. I mean, it literally was only a couple of days. Harken back to the global financial crisis, it took, months for things to continuously unfold, and we condensed that really only into a couple of days. I mean, these are real issues that regulators think about, right? The positive externalities and utility that we talk about are all super powerful, but the negative externalities certainly need to be addressed before entirely unleashing. But I do think that the regulators, the SEC has been really good now at beginning to separate what is a decentralized issuance of something versus a centralized, controlled issuance of a security that's just using the technology as a backbone. And that's a really big differentiator. That's also happening around the globe with other regulators as well. They're deconstructing, is this a permissionless situation, or can we use blockchains, public blockchains and private blockchains for good control environments inside of some of these constructs? I think that is really right here in front of us in the next weeks, quite frankly. So we're super excited at Franklin Templeton about being able to take advantage of those things in the very near term.
Yeah, no, and that is a sober reminder that you want to think about the negative externalities as well. Even though we seem to all be doomed to only learn by our own experience rather than learning the lessons of history. Quickly, Cynthia, public versus private blockchains. Is this a debate we're still having?
I think of it less as a debate, but rather what is the use case for a public versus a private blockchain? And that ultimately, I think, underpins the thesis that this is going to be a multi-chain world that we live in. There are going to be different use cases for the different chains, and the different chains all operate differently in terms of what they deliver. And so from that standpoint, public versus private is more of a debate on what is the use case. Why do you need to have a private blockchain? And then ultimately, from a market standpoint, how is it that we're able to actually see a market with multiple ledgers that are being maintained across different entities?
Awesome. And I'm looking out in the audience. It's hard because it's bright. I'm not seeing hoodies, but I'm thinking that might have more to do with the fact that it's 80 degrees outside in late October, which is absolutely insane. But I do know that there's quite a lot of digital asset native firms out there who may be slightly wary about the institutions coming into their space. But, Roger, starting with you, how do you view what opportunities they might be able to grasp or how you might be able to work together with firms like that?
Well, we think there's, we've been pretty vocal in our belief that public blockchains as a utility will continue to proliferate. But as Cynthia points out, we think this is a multi-chain world moving forward as long as the Federal Reserve, other regulators prevent some of the global financial firms from participating. I think we talked earlier about what could be what more could change in the U.S. How about SAB 121? How about we just get rid of SAB 121? That would be a nice unlock.
We got close.
Right, and so, but it's this idea that there's creativity that you're wanting to unlock. If we're talking about a world of expanding the opportunity sets for investors, large and small, to create better outcomes and create more customization, then we're absolutely super enthusiastic about all of the digitally native firms who are trying to unlock those opportunities. I think the huge success of the Bitcoin ETF this year means that the asset management leaders across the industry, if they haven't already had their eyes open, are now going to open their eyes. And I think you're going to see more partnerships, probably from larger brand name financial service firms to find that creativity and attach themselves to it in some way, shape, or form. So I think it's a really super collaborative environment that's unfolding as a result of all of these parties being far more encouraged about the outcomes that are forward.
I also think we have to just stop with the us versus them mentality. I haven't worn a suit since I joined BNY, for what it's worth. Right, it's not an us versus them mentality. If we're gonna get somewhere, we're gonna get there together. And I think there's a lot to be learned from incumbent firms challenging those of us who have been doing it for hundreds of years. There's a lot to be learned for the people who lived through, to Roger's point, the many financial crises of the last 50 years. I think there's three-ish. Ish?
Financial crisis?
What, 50 years, yeah, ish?
I can probably.
However many there are. Right, but I think it's important for us to view it, to Roger's language, as a collaboration. And I will count this as success when we stop being on panels and people say, everyone's worried about talking to the lame banking people or asset management people, right? Everyone wants to move in a forward-thinking direction. So, reach out to, I'll say, any of us, any of our peers in the industry. We want to have the conversations. We want to evolve. We are evolving. I think a lot of the announcements that you've seen over the last, 3 to 5 years, especially the last 12 months, are indicative of that. We're all very friendly. And we've done a lot from a diverse talent perspective to think about how do we bring in thinkers who want to do things differently and will challenge us and be in the room, at the table with the teams to say, actually, it doesn't make sense that this is how you record keep. How can we do that in a new way that's much more forward thinking? And I think that's the evolution of traditional financial services. And I think when we stop talking about it as us versus them, traditional, digital, et cetera, that's when we'll really start to see that kind of big acceleration.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end this panel. So please join me in thanking our panelists for the discussion.